Park in NBA 2K used to be the best part of the game, back when grinding to legend and wearing a mascot actually meant something. But over the years, that all changed, making most of the grind feel pointless. Today we're going year by year, from 2K10's online blacktop all the way to Park in 2K26, and that's to see exactly when Park went from an enjoyable grind to one of the most overrated modes in the game. To start off our list, we have 2K10 and 2K11. In 2K10 and 2K11, we got the same exact mode in both games, but it was our first taste of bringing your player online to play online pickup games. You just load in and hoop. There was no clothing store, no boosts, and most importantly, no VC. Both teams had jerseys, so it felt like you were really stepping into an actual game with your created player. It was simple, it was raw, but it worked. You weren't grinding for rewards, you weren't buying clothes, and you weren't chasing animations. It was just basketball. For the first time, you could take your player online and test yourself against other people, with or without friends. Looking back now, it seems bare bones compared to what Park eventually became, but at the time this was brand new, and the mods made this mode even more memorable. But with all that being said, this was where it all started, the beginning of something that would grow into a centerpiece of NBA 2K. And that leads us to 2K12. Those online pickup games we were just talking about, gone. And it's not like they replaced it with something better, they just took it out. Now there was no way to bring your My Player online and hoop with friends. For anyone who got a taste of 2K10 or 2K11's pickup games or even crew, this felt like a huge step backwards. The servers in 2K10 and 2K11 were pretty bad, but at least you had the option to try and play. In 2K12, there was nothing. You could still hoop offline, sure, but for a lot of players, it felt like 2K stripped away the very thing that made the mode exciting in the first place. It left people frustrated because once you played online, going back to offline blacktop just didn't cut it. 2K12 ended up being remembered as the year that 2K took away online My Player modes that had real potential. But hey, at least this game had one of the best intros in 2K history. And that leads us to 2K13. After all online My Player modes were removed in 2K12, in 2K13, it actually returned. You could finally bring your guy online again and hoop with friends. It was basically the same concept as 2K10 and 2K11's pickup games, but this time it ran a lot smoother, and the servers weren't perfect, but compared to before, it felt like progress. You just load in with your My Player and hoop. But what made 2K13 stand out was that this was the first year 2K introduced VC. For the first time, everything you did in the game was tied back to one currency. You earned VC in almost every mode, and you would spend it to buy the most important things in the game. And along with the VC came the brand new My Player shop. For the first time, you could buy clothes, accessories, and even jewelry to customize your player. And that was so you could show it off when you played online. This was a game changer. But it is also where 2K realized how much people cared about cosmetics and customizing their players. But back then, at least things were fairly priced. You weren't dropping 20k VC on a do-rag. The grind still felt manageable, and the shop was something fun that they added to the game. But it wasn't the whole point of the mode. There was no rep system, no huge rewards for playing, but online blacktop was a better version of what the game had before. And most of all, 2K13 brought online hooping back and laid the foundation for what Park eventually would become. And that leads us to 2K14. 2K14 changed everything. It wasn't just matchmaking anymore. This was the first year 2K introduced Park. Instead of pressing start and waiting for a game to load, you could now walk around a shared environment and step on the got next spot, and then you'd wait for the next game. It completely changed how people experienced NBA 2K. Now you could pull up to the park with friends, step on the court, and see other players walking around too. You'd watch players hooping on the courts while you waited, and it made the mode feel alive in a way no 2K game had ever done before. It may seem simple now, but in 2K14, this was groundbreaking. Seeing 10, 20, 30 other players walking around with their My Players all at once was crazy. The park instantly felt like a community. It was the start of something special, something that players had only dreamed of before, and it would end up becoming the backbone of NBA 2K for the next decade. And that leads us to 2K15. 2K15 is remembered as the start of the golden era for My Park. Each park had its own look, vibe, and community. Affiliations gave players an identity. You weren't just a My Player anymore. You were repping Rivet, Sunset, or Old Town, and people took pride in it. This was the first year of rival days where parks battled against each other for bragging rights. Rival days made the mode competitive and gave everyone a reason to keep grinding even after they got to 99. The grind to legend in 2K15 was massive, but that's what made it meaningful. If you saw a legend walking around, you respected it because you knew how much time and effort went into getting there. And unlike nowadays, mascots actually meant something. They weren't just a cosmetic you got in the battle pass. And to make things even better, at the end of the year, the park with the most rival day wins got a brand new park design. This type of thing was unheard of at the time, and it made the grind feel like it mattered. 2K15 wasn't just fun, it was competitive, it was rewarding, and for many players, this is when the peak of park first began. And that leads us to another great year with 2K16. 2K16 took what 2K15 built and made it even better. Affiliations continued with unique parks, and the grind to legend still actually felt like it meant something and was so rewarding. But what made 2K16 special was how much being a top rep meant. They literally showed the leaderboard every time you loaded into park, and you knew exactly where you stood compared to the rest of the community, and so did everyone else. This created real competition. If you were chasing top 10 in Rivet or Sunset, everyone knew your name. Being a top rep wasn't just a personal accomplishment, it made you a known player in the community. One of the great additions that 2K still has not added back to this day was the addition of the 21 core. This was a 3-player free-for-all where it became every man for themselves. The 21 core quickly became a fan favorite because it was chaotic, competitive, and fun. Sadly, 2K still has not added this back in the game. 2K16 also introduced being able to get a pet tiger, and this instantly became one of the most iconic rewards in park history. If you saw someone walking around with a tiger, you knew that they had been grinding and you're probably going to get cooked. For many players, this is the year they think of when they talk about best park ever because it had affiliations, competition, iconic rewards, and the community felt the most alive it had ever been. 2K16 showed what park should be, and it feels like 2K has been chasing this greatness ever since. And that leads us to 2K17. 2K17 continued park, but things started to shift. Affiliations were still there, and the grind was still real, and it was still a good game, but it didn't quite feel as fresh as 15 and 16. In 2K17, the grind to legend was still tough, and top reps were still respected, but some of the magic had started to fade. It wasn't bad by any means, and people still believe this is one of the peak years of park, but compared to 15 and 16, you could feel that things were starting to slow down. But still, 2K17 is still up there with the greats. For some, it was the last time park really felt fresh. And that leads us to when 2K fell off their rocker, 2K18. This is where things really started to go downhill. 2K18 introduced the neighborhood. On paper, it sounded incredible. A living world where you could walk around, visit stores, and play basketball. In reality, it became one of the most frustrating years of park ever. And the problem wasn't just the design. It was the way 2K leaned into greed. Clothes were overpriced, boosts became basically mandatory, and the old rep grind was gone. They replaced it with the road to 99, making every single reward locked behind VC. For the first time, it felt like the grind wasn't about basketball anymore, it was about how much VC you could spend. They even started charging for haircuts, something that had always been free prior to this game. Overall, the neighborhood had potential to be the future of park, but 2K completely botched it. They tried to charge for every little thing they could, and it just took the life out of this game completely. And it made park damn near unplayable. 2K18 quickly went from hype to disappointment, and for many, this was the year the decline truly began. And that leads us to 2K19. 2K19 brought some improvements. The neighborhood looked completely different from 2K18. This year, Takeover was also introduced, and it was a fun addition. When that fire icon popped up under your player, the whole game could flip instantly. But the problems of 2K18 weren't fixed. The rep grind was still replaced with Road to 99, and progression still felt tied behind VC. You could feel the improvement over 18, but it wasn't enough to bring park back to its glory days. They tried their best with the new events, but again, this game just did not feel the same. 2K19 overall had some cool features, but it still wasn't the park players were asking for. And that leads us to 2K20. In 2K20, the neighborhood returned, and it was literally the same layout as 2K19. Same courts, same designs, just different lighting and different events. And for the first time, the seasons actually changed with new themes. Winter, fall, and spring. It was a small touch, but it kept the mode somewhat fresh. The difference this year was park rep. My rep returned, and for the first time in years, players could grind from rookie to legend again. That brought real purpose back to park, and events like Gold Rush, Basketball Gods, and Big Top Challenge gave park more energy too. And of course, 2K20 became a special year because of COVID. With everyone stuck at home, park had one of the biggest player bases ever. Some people argue that 2K20 is overrated because of COVID, but either way, it was one of the better versions of park we've had in recent years. My rep, events, and a huge player base made it feel alive again. And that leads us into 2K21. On next gen, 2K went all in on something brand new, and that was called The City. On paper, it sounded like the future of park. A massive open world with affiliations and more courts than ever. In reality, The City was way too big, and when you combine that with 2K's notoriously mid servers, it caused unneeded latency and wasted time. Instead of hooping, most of your experience was spent sprinting around a giant map. And although affiliations returned, which should have been exciting, they didn't feel the same as the golden days of 2K15 through 2K17. And a big reason, they removed the competitive element. The best affiliation no longer won a brand new park. And me personally, I think that one change alone killed a lot of motivation. And of course, VC was still a problem. Clothes, boosts, animations, everything tied back to spending more. 2K21 will always be remembered as the year we got the biggest park ever with the city, but unlike my girlfriend, we learned bigger doesn't always mean better. And that leads us to 2K22. 2K22 was another split year. On current gen, we got the cruise ship, a refreshing change of scenery that actually worked better than expected. On next gen, the city returned. This time, a little smaller, and fast travel tried to cut down the endless running, but even then, it was still too much. At launch, the gameplay actually felt solid. Smooth movement, cleaner shooting, and for a brief moment, Park felt fun again. But then, just a month in, 2K dropped a patch that absolutely killed the game, and it became a cycle that we've seen way too many times. Legend returned this year too, but not in the way players wanted. Instead of grinding thousands of park games over the year, you now had to hit level 40 across 4 different seasons. And the reward? A freaking parrot. To make things worse, seasons also gave players mascots. And with so many players running around as mascots, they completely lost all relevancy. 2K22 isn't remembered as perfect, but compared to 21, it felt like a step in the right direction. At least the cruise ship was fun. And for a short window, gameplay actually felt good.
Y'all are scrubs!
And that leads us to 2K23. 2K23 kept the same formula, the city on next gen and the cruise ship on current gen. And at this point, they both felt recycled. On next gen, the city got a facelift. The layout was slightly tweaked, but when you loaded in, it was still the same oversized environment, with way too much running around and the same exact vibe we had the year before. The courts were scattered across a giant map, and even though it looked different on the surface, the core experience didn't feel new. On current gen, the cruise ship returned with small changes to the deck design. You had different levels, but again, it was the same idea. Walk around, find a court, and hoop. It wasn't bad, but it also wasn't anything players hadn't seen in 2K22. Seasons were back again, and once more, the rewards were mid. Banners, emotes, clothing, nothing worth grinding for. The big incentives of past years like mascots and legend rewards didn't carry the same weight. Gameplay was okay, shooting felt cleaner, dribbling had more depth, and defense felt a little bit stronger, but none of that solved the biggest issue. Park was still stale. The new look city and cruise ship gave the illusion of change, but once you played for a week, it felt like you were back in 2K22. 2K23 wasn't a disaster, but it also wasn't exciting. The grind had no meaning, the rewards were forgettable, and the environments, whether the city or the cruise ship, didn't do enough to keep people engaged. For a lot of players, this is when Park officially crossed the line from being fun to just being a waste of time. And that leads us to 2K24. 2K24 brought back the city once again. It had a new look, but just like prior years, underneath the surface, it was the same oversized environment. Pro play was one of 2K's biggest selling points this year, with animations captured straight from NBA footage, which was cool on paper, but in Park, it really didn't matter. It didn't fix the core issues. And of course, seasons returned again. And the rewards, no surprise here, underwhelming. Again, just gave you pointless banners, animations, and cosmetics. Nothing meaningful. And grinding to level 40 didn't feel like an achievement at all. Honestly, it felt like 2K just wanted their own version of a battle pass to try and maximize profits. And affiliations still really meant nothing. Events were recycled, and the city still didn't feel alive. Park in 2K24 was stale, repetitive, and felt like it had no identity anymore. Another year, another coat of paint, but nothing really changed. And that's going to bring us to 2K25. 2K25 launched with a lot of hype, but Park players instantly realized what was going on. The city was back again. Sure, it was a little bit better, but the same cycle of running around and recycled gameplay was still there. I'll give it credit, it was slightly better than years past, but not by much. Seasons were still the formula, and everyone knew the drill. Grind to level 40, earn some banners, emotes, and cosmetics, and move on. This stayed the same year after year. At first, Park gameplay felt okay. Shooting was green or nothing, and those overpowered all-around builds weren't as common. But after a couple weeks, it became obvious. Paint defense was terrible, post scorers were taking over the game, and the tweaks just were not enough. It was still the same as previous years. Loading into the city, running around, and grinding for rewards that didn't matter. Events kept coming back, but they were the same ones from prior years, and the only exciting event came from when they added the old parks from 2K15 as an event. But this was just a strategy to sell the game, and honestly, they just didn't hit the same. If they're gonna do this, you gotta just add the park all year round. When you add it as an event, it just doesn't feel the same. And the grind feels empty. The rewards feel meaningless, and the mode that once defined the community had become the same repetitive, recycled garbage. And that leads us to the most recent, 2K26. After spending some time on 2K26, I'll be real. Park actually feels like it's heading in the right direction for once. The city looks better, matchmaking feels smoother, and the mode feels more playable out the gate than it has in a while. Seasons are still here, but the rewards are a little more thought out this time. It's not perfect, but it's at least looking like they actually made some progress this year. Gameplay feels faster and smoother, shooting is cleaner, there's less RNG, and games flow better overall. But of course, the builder still allows metas to dominate. And right now, the biggest problem is those 7-4 builds. Nobody can contest them and it ruins the balance of Park completely. The problem is, 2K has already started dropping patches that hurt the game, so we'll have to see what happens moving forward. And that is the history of Park. From online pickup games in 2K10, to the golden years of being a part of an affiliation and when Legend actually meant something, to recycled cities and Battle Pass grinds we've been given the past few years. It's been a journey, and for better or worse, it's left us with a lot of memories. So when did Park stop being fun for you guys? For me, it was 2K18, but let me know in the comments what your guys' thoughts are. Thank you guys so much for 2,000 subscribers. It means the world, honestly. And in case you forgot, remember to always stay saucy.
Ever since I can remember, I've been popping my collar.